Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block: politics, perspectives, and players. Impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. You can't seem to get away from that word these days as hearings in the U.S. Congress intensify. The inquiry revolves around whether President Donald Trump improperly pressured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to dig up dirt on one of the frontrunners for the Democratic Party, former Vice President Joe Biden. Once these impeachment hearings wrap up, what happens next? Joining me now to discuss how the process will unfold moving forward and how this could all play out in the U.S. elections next year is Allan Lichtman, history professor at American University in Washington, D.C. Mr. Lichtman, thanks for joining us today.
Anytime. Thank you, Mercedes.
Sir, you wrote the book a couple of years ago called The Case for Impeachment about President Donald Trump. Flash forward to what we're seeing today and tell me what you make of what we're seeing now versus what you wrote about in your book.
What I'm seeing now is absolutely the culmination of what I predicted in my book. I was able to predict the impeachment. It's actually 2.5 years ago. I even predicted it at the time I predicted his election in September 2016, because I saw someone who had spent his whole career flouting the law, not just lying, but creating an alternative reality. Someone who had spent his life promoting himself, enriching himself, and caring about absolutely no one else, and someone who had never been held accountable for anything. Those traits we now see being reflected in this impeachment inquiry. This is someone who every witness has testified cared nothing about the national security of the United States, cared nothing about Ukraine, cared only about pressuring, indeed demanding the Ukrainians to help him cheat and get reelected in 2020.
How significant is what's been coming out at the impeachment hearings so far, and how are they unfolding?
You know, every witness has said essentially the same thing, maybe not in the same words, but these are not never Trumpers. These are not Democratic plants. These are people who have worked for Democratic and Republican administration. Jennifer Williams says her mentor was Condoleezza Rice, George W. Bush's national security advisor, Secretary of State. So these are very credible witnesses, and they all are telling the same story, and that's what's so significant, that the president was demanding that this president of Ukraine, who's utterly dependent upon the United States, help him cheat in 2020 by investigating his political opponent, and this discredited conspiracy theory that it was really the Ukrainians, not the Russians, who meddled in the 2016 election. If this isn't impeachable, I can't imagine what would be.
Can you walk us through how the process unfolds for an international audience? Because we hear a lot about impeachment, but we don't necessarily understand the mechanics of it. So if you could start with how much longer you expect these hearings to last in the House.
Right. The impeachment is the first stage of a two-step process for possibly removing a president. Impeachment under the Constitution is the sole authority of the U.S. House of Representatives. And this is one of the House committees that's investigating. I have said many times, you cannot put a timeline on impeachment. In the Nixon case, they started out investigating a break-in at Democratic headquarters at the Watergate building. And they wound up finding out about illegal campaign contributions, illegal wiretaps, illegal break-ins. So you never know where an investigation might go. And it may be soon that the House gets the president's financial records. And who knows what they may find there. So after this Intelligence Committee investigates, a report goes over to the House Judiciary Committee. And they will vote or not to recommend articles of impeachment to the full House. If they do so by a majority vote, the full House could adopt one or any number of articles of impeachment. Those articles then go over to the Senate, in which the Senate conducts a trial of the president presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And in this trial, and this is what is so important, no matter the outcome, Democrats from the House appoint prosecutors who can call witnesses, present documents, make opening and closing statements, cross-examine any witnesses brought forward by the president. And the president would have to make a real defense at a trial, not just a Rudy Giuliani type spin, not just a presidential attack that everyone against him is a Democratic plant or a never Trumper.
When the Senate conducts that trial at the conclusion of it, what are the options then and the possible outcomes for the president?
Yes, they can convict and remove the president, but it takes a 2/3 vote of the senators present. They can also rule that he is ineligible to run again for any other office, which is quite likely if 2/3 vote to convict.
Given that the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, what's the likelihood of that happening?
A few months ago, I said 0. I think it's still unlikely, but as the evidence piles up, it becomes more likely. One of the Lichtman rules of politics is that for incumbent office holders like these Republican senators, their top priority, maybe their only priority, is survival. And if they think the president is bringing them down, and look what happened recently. Democrats won the governorships in Kentucky and Louisiana, states that Trump won by 20 and 30 percentage points. So if they think Trump spells their doom, they could well turn against him. I'm not saying they will, but there is a scenario.
How do you see all of this playing out heading into the November 2020 elections?
Well, I was able to predict Donald Trump's win in 2016 and have a track record going back to 1984 in predicting election results. And one of my keys to the White House, which is my system, is the scandal key. And if the House makes Donald Trump only the third American president ever to be impeached by the full House. Remember, Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. Then that would flip the scandal key, and that would be very bad for the president. And already, not just the election results, but the public opinion results are very negative for the president. 70% thinks he did something wrong in this Ukrainian scandal. Only 25% think he didn't. You know, everyone talks about the 35 to 40% irrevocable base of the president, but this poll suggests it may be as low as 25%.
You talk about the historical comparisons, and if you look at Richard Nixon or Bill Clinton, how does this compare to those impeachment hearings?
Well, it's vastly more serious than the Bill Clinton impeachment, where he was being impeached for covering up and lying about a consensual private affair that had nothing to do with his duties as president. The Watergate scandal surrounding Richard Nixon was obviously more serious than the Clinton matter because it did involve our democracy. But even the Nixon scandal pales in comparison to the Trump scandals, because the Trump scandals really, for the first time in an impeachment matter, threaten the national security of the United States and threaten to embolden and encourage aggression by our great adversary, Russia, under Vladimir Putin. That makes it unique in the annals of American history.
Do you think Americans who are hearing this, and that would include hardcore Trump supporters, will change their opinions of him now?
I think it will, but you never know. Look, we live in this age of instant gratification, and the Democrats are playing the long game, building the case block by block. But we may get explosive testimony tomorrow when Gordon Sondland, essentially Trump's man in Europe, the guy who gave him $1 million for his inauguration and bought the ambassadorship to the European Union, he was in direct contact with the president. He knows exactly what the president was directing him to do. And if he testifies, yes, the president was directing me to tell the Ukrainians that they're not going to get $400 million in aid in a meeting with the president unless they help the president cheat on the 2020 campaign with politically charged investigations, that could blow this whole case wide open.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Anytime. Thank you, Mercedes.
That's all the time we have for the West Block. I'm Mercedes Stevenson.